The fourth year they forgot was when I finally understood that love without effort isn't love at all. I sat alone in my mansion's grand dining room on March 22nd, staring at the single slice of chocolate cake I'd ordered from the bakery, where I used to take them as children, watching the 80 inches candles flicker in the silence. No calls, no cards, no acknowledgement that the woman who built a business empire worth $47 million had reached this milestone alone.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tell us a duh.
That's when I picked up my phone and called my attorney. "Timothy," I said, my voice steady as steel, "it's time to update my will. I want my children removed entirely." This is the story of how I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is teach people that actions have consequences, even when those people are your own flesh and blood. My name is Irene Bale, and I never imagined I'd become the kind of mother who would disinherit her own children. But after 4 consecutive years of forgotten birthdays, I realized that the family I had sacrificed everything to build had forgotten the woman who built it. At 80 years old, I finally understood that respect isn't given automatically. It must be earned and maintained, even by your own children. I live in Westchester County, New York, in the 12-bedroom colonial mansion I purchased 30 years ago when Bale Industries first hit the Fortune 500 list. Every room in this house tells the story of a woman who started with nothing and built something extraordinary. The mahogany-paneled library, where I used to read bedtime stories to my 3 children. The chef's kitchen where I taught them to make their grandmother's recipes during school breaks. The sunroom where we celebrated every milestone, every achievement, every moment that mattered. At least, I thought those moments mattered to them too. Let me tell you how a woman goes from being surrounded by family to sitting alone on her 80th birthday, and how that solitude became the catalyst for the most important decision of my life. I raised 3 children after my husband Carl died in a car accident when our youngest was only 12. Claire, now 52, Timothy, 49, and Jonas, 45, 3 successful adults who wouldn't exist without the sacrifices I made during those dark years, when grief nearly consumed me. Instead of wallowing in widowhood, I channeled every ounce of my pain into building something that would secure their futures. I started Bale Industries in my garage, manufacturing custom automotive parts with equipment I bought using Carl's life insurance money. For 15 years I worked 18-hour days, missed school plays when production deadlines loomed, and turned family dinners into business strategy sessions, where my children learned the value of hard work and determination. By the time Claire graduated college, we had manufacturing facilities in 3 states. When Timothy finished his MBA, we'd gone international. When Jonas passed the bar exam, Bale Industries was generating $200 million in annual revenue. I thought I was building a legacy. I thought I was creating something that would bind us together forever. I thought the empire I constructed was a love letter to my children, written in steel and sweat and sleepless nights. Claire moved to California after college and became a successful entertainment lawyer. She married Joseph Willis, a studio executive, and they live in a Beverly Hills mansion that I helped finance. She calls twice a year, Christmas and Mother's Day, conversations that feel more like status reports than connections between mother and daughter. When I ask about my grandchildren, Sarah and Michael, she gives me updates that sound like she's reading from a school newsletter. Timothy stayed closer to home, settling in Connecticut where he runs a hedge fund that manages over $2 billion in assets. He's unmarried, claims he's too busy for relationships, and treats our monthly dinners like board meetings, where he updates me on his portfolio performance. He drives a different luxury car every few months and owns properties in the Hamptons, Aspen, and Monaco. I'm proud of his success, but I can't remember the last time he asked about my life instead of reporting on his own. Jonas became a corporate attorney in Manhattan, specializing in mergers and acquisitions. He married Sheila Harold, an investment banker, and they live in a penthouse overlooking Central Park with their twin daughters, Emma and Grace. He's the most attentive of my children, visiting every few months with the girls, but even those visits feel choreographed. The twins are polite but distant, more interested in their phones than their grandmother's stories. All three of my children achieved exactly what I hoped they would when I was working those 18-hour days. They're financially successful, professionally respected, and living the kinds of lives that justify every sacrifice I made. But somewhere in their pursuit of success, they forgot the woman who made it all possible. The first forgotten birthday happened when I turned 77. I had spent weeks planning a small celebration, nothing elaborate, just dinner at the country club, where we used to celebrate family milestones. I'd made reservations for 8, assuming my children would bring their families. I'd bought a new dress, had my hair done, and spent the morning arranging flowers from my garden. By 6 o'clock, when the silence had stretched into something painful, I called the club and canceled the reservation. I drove to the cemetery where Carl is buried and sat by his grave, telling him about our successful, busy, important children, who were too occupied with their own lives to remember mine. The second forgotten birthday stung worse because it came with false hope. Jonas called 3 days later, mortified when Sheila reminded him of the date. He sent an enormous flower arrangement and promised to do better. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice thick with genuine regret. "We've been so busy with the twins' school activities, and work has been insane, but that's no excuse. I'll put it in my calendar right now." I let myself believe that conversation would change things. I marked the calendar with my 79th birthday, circled it in red, and waited to see if love could triumph over busy schedules and good intentions. It couldn't. The third forgotten birthday was when something cold and final settled in my chest. Not anger, exactly, but something worse, indifference. I realized I had stopped expecting anything from them, and in that stopping, I had found a strange kind of peace. But the fourth forgotten birthday, my 80th, was different. This wasn't just another missed milestone. This was a declaration that the woman who had built a $47 million empire, who had sacrificed her youth and happiness to secure their futures, had become invisible to the people who owed her everything. That's when I knew what I had to do. That evening, as I sat in my study surrounded by photographs of family vacations and graduation ceremonies that now felt like artifacts from someone else's life, I pulled out the leather-bound album that chronicled our journey from struggling widow to business dynasty. Every page told the story of sacrifice that my children seemed to have forgotten. The first photograph showed me at 35, standing in front of our original garage workshop, wearing Carl's old work shirt and holding a wrench that felt foreign in my manicured hands. Behind me, you could barely make out the silhouette of our first CNC machine, a used piece of equipment I'd bought with money that should have gone toward the children's college funds. Claire was 12 then, Timothy was 9, and Jonas was 5. They were too young to understand that Mommy's new hobby was actually our survival strategy. I remember the night I made the decision to start the business. It was 3 months after Carl's funeral, and the life insurance money was disappearing faster than I'd anticipated. The mortgage payment was due, Claire needed new school clothes, and Timothy's soccer cleats were falling apart. I sat at this same mahogany desk, calculator in hand, trying to make numbers add up that simply wouldn't. That's when I found Carl's business plan tucked away in his desk drawer, sketches for automotive parts he'd designed, but never had the capital to manufacture. If your father believed in this, I told myself that night, then I'll make it work for us. What followed were the hardest 15 years of my life. I learned manufacturing processes that most people spend decades mastering.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I negotiated with suppliers who didn't take a widow seriously until I proved I understood quality control better than they did. I hired engineers, managed production schedules, and handled customer service calls while still making sure my children had home-cooked dinners and help with their homework. Claire, my eldest, became my unofficial assistant during those early years. She'd sit at the kitchen table doing her math homework while I balanced production budgets on my laptop. On weekends, she'd come to the facility and help sort inventory while I handled paperwork. She was the one who suggested we expand into European markets when she was 17, after her French teacher mentioned the growing automotive industry in Germany. "Mom," she'd said over dinner one night, "what if you could sell your parts to BMW or Mercedes? Wouldn't that be better than just selling to local repair shops?" That conversation led to our first international contract, a $2.3 million deal that transformed Bale Industries from a regional supplier to a global player. Claire's insight had changed everything, and I made sure she knew it. I sent her to business school at Wharton with the understanding that she'd join the company after graduation and help lead our international expansion. But after college, Claire was recruited by a Los Angeles entertainment law firm. The glamour of Hollywood, the promise of representing celebrities, and a starting salary that was double what I could offer, drew her away from the business we'd built together. "I need to make my own mark, Mom," she'd explain during a tense phone call that I still remember word for word. "I can't spend my life living in your shadow." Timothy was different, more analytical, more cautious. He'd spend summers working in our accounting department, asking detailed questions about profit margins and return on investment. At 15, he created a spreadsheet that identified $300,000 in annual cost savings through more efficient inventory management. I was so proud that I had it framed and hung in my office, where it still hangs today. Timothy seemed destined to take over the financial side of Bale Industries. He studied economics at Harvard, earned his MBA from Stanford, and spent his summers interning at major investment firms. But when he graduated, he announced that he'd accepted a position at Goldman Sachs. "I need to understand high-level finance before I can help grow our business," he'd explained. "Give me 5 years on Wall Street and I'll come back with the knowledge to take Bale Industries to the next level." 5 years became 10, then 20. Timothy's preparation for joining the family business became a career that made him independently wealthy, while our company continued to grow without his promised expertise. Jonas, my youngest, showed the most loyalty to our family legacy. He worked part-time at our legal department through high school and college, learning contract law and regulatory compliance. When he graduated from Columbia Law School, I was certain he'd join our in-house legal team and eventually take over as CEO. Instead, he joined a white-shoe Manhattan law firm, specializing in corporate mergers. "I want to understand how big deals work," he'd said, echoing his brother's promises about gaining experience before returning home. "When I come back to Bale Industries, I'll be able to negotiate acquisitions that will make us a Fortune 100 company." But Jonas never came back either. His expertise in mergers and acquisitions made him millions in legal fees, while I continued to handle our company's legal needs through external counsel who didn't understand our business the way family should have. One by one, my children took the education I'd provided, the opportunities I'd created, and the confidence I'd instilled, and used them to build lives that had no room for the woman who'd made it all possible. They attended charity galas in cities hundreds of miles away, but couldn't attend their mother's birthday dinner. They closed multi-million-dollar deals, but couldn't remember the woman who taught them that business was about relationships, not just numbers. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd built Bale Industries to create a legacy for my children, but in achieving that goal, I'd made them so successful that they no longer needed their mother, or so they thought. By my 79th birthday, Bale Industries was generating $47 million in annual revenue. Our parts were installed in vehicles manufactured by every major automotive company in the world. We employed over 800 people across 5 manufacturing facilities. I'd achieved everything I'd dreamed of during those lonely nights after Carl's death. But I'd achieved it alone, and I was beginning to understand that success without family to share it with wasn't success at all, it was just expensive loneliness. The leather album closed with a soft thud, and I looked around my study at the awards, photographs, and mementos of a life well lived but poorly appreciated. Tomorrow, I would call Timothy Willis, my attorney, and begin the process that would teach my children the hardest lesson I'd ever had to give them. Sometimes love requires consequences. The first forgotten birthday happened on March 22, 3 years ago, when I turned 77. I had spent weeks preparing for what I thought would be a celebration of not just another year of life, but of everything we'd accomplished together as a family. Bale Industries had just been featured on the cover of Forbes magazine as one of America's most resilient family businesses, and I'd foolishly believed that recognition would remind my children of what we'd built together. I made reservations at the Westchester Country Club, the same elegant dining room where we'd celebrated Claire's law school graduation, Timothy's first $1 million portfolio milestone, and Jonas's partnership announcement. I reserved the private dining room overlooking the golf course, the one with the crystal chandelier that caught the late afternoon light so beautifully. I even arranged for the chef to prepare Carl's favorite prime rib, thinking my children would appreciate the sentimental touch. I spent the morning of my birthday getting ready with the same excitement I'd felt before every important family gathering. I wore the navy Chanel suit that Claire had helped me pick out for the Forbes photo shoot, the one she'd said made me look powerful but approachable. I had my hair styled at the salon where I'd been going for 20 years, telling Margaret, my hairdresser, all about the celebration I was planning. "Mrs. Bale," she'd said, while applying my makeup, "you look radiant. Your children are going to be so impressed with how elegant you look." I arrived at the country club at 5:30, 30 minutes before our 6 o'clock reservation, and chose a table by the window where I could watch the sunset while we dined. I ordered a bottle of Dom Perignon, the same champagne we'd shared when Bale Industries first hit $10 million in annual revenue. I sat there watching other families arrive for their evening meals, imagining how proud I'd feel when my successful children walked through those doors. By 6:15, when no one had arrived, I started making excuses to myself. Traffic was probably heavy coming from the city. Maybe Jonas was running late from a client meeting. Perhaps Claire's flight from Los Angeles had been delayed. I ordered an appetizer to share, thinking they'd appreciate having something to eat when they finally arrived. The club's dining room gradually filled with families celebrating birthdays, anniversaries, and business achievements. I watched a grandfather blow out candles surrounded by 3 generations of loved ones, and I felt the first stab of worry that something might be wrong. Surely one of my children would have called if there was an emergency. By 7 o'clock, when the waiter asked for the 3rd time if I wanted to order dinner, I finally accepted that no one was coming. The shame burned hot in my chest as I canceled our meal and asked for the check. The champagne sat unopened on the table, a monument to my own foolish expectations. I drove home in silence, my Chanel suit feeling like a costume I'd worn to the wrong party. The house was dark and quiet, a stark contrast to the warm, noisy family dinners I remembered from when the children were young. I sat in my study and waited for the phone to ring, certain that one of them would call to explain their absence. The phone never rang. The next morning, I called Claire first, my hands shaking as I dialed her Beverly Hills number. When she answered, I could hear the sounds of her household getting ready for school, her children's voices, her husband Joseph calling out about breakfast, the normal chaos of a busy family. "Happy belated birthday, Mom," she said when she heard my voice. but there was something hollow in her tone that told me she'd just remembered. I'm so sorry I didn't call yesterday. We had Sarah's school play, and then Michael had soccer practice, and by the time we got home, it was so late, and I didn't want to wake you. The explanation sounded rehearsed, like something she'd practiced in case I called. Did you forget it was my birthday? I asked directly, needing to hear the truth even though it would hurt. There was a long pause. Of course not, Mom. Time got away from me. You know how crazy things get with the kids' schedules. I let her explanation stand, even though we both knew it was a lie. Claire had never forgotten a birthday before. Not her children's, not her husband's, not even her assistant's. Her calendar was a masterpiece of organization, with every important date color-coded and cross-referenced. If my birthday had mattered to her, it would have been impossible to forget. Timothy's reaction was worse because he didn't even pretend to remember. When I called his Connecticut office, his assistant put me through immediately, and I could hear the surprise in his voice when I mentioned the date. Yesterday was your birthday, he asked, and I could hear him typing on his computer, probably checking his calendar. Mom, I'm so sorry, this merger has been consuming my life for months. I haven't been thinking about anything else. At least he was honest about forgetting, but his honesty cut deeper than Claire's elaborate excuse. A $2 billion merger was more important to him than the woman who'd raised him. His professional success mattered more than his personal relationships. Jonas was the most painful because I could hear genuine remorse in his voice when I reached him at his Manhattan law firm. Mom, I'm mortified, he said, and I believed him. Sheila asked me 3 times this week if we had any family obligations, and I kept saying no. I completely blanked on your birthday. It's all right, sweetheart. I heard myself saying, falling back into the old pattern of making my children feel better about disappointing me. You're busy with the twins and work. I understand, but I didn't understand. I understood that my 77th birthday wasn't important enough to merit a phone call, a card, or even a text message. I understood that the woman who'd built a fortune to secure their futures had become an afterthought in their carefully scheduled lives. That night, I sat in the same chair where I'd made the decision to start Bale Industries 40 years earlier, and I made another decision. I would give them one more chance to show me that our relationship mattered to them. I was still hopeful then. I still believed that love could triumph over busy schedules and competing priorities. I should have known better. The second forgotten birthday cut deeper because it came after promises, after conversations about doing better, after what I'd foolishly believed was a wake-up call that would change. Jonas had seemed genuinely shaken by his oversight the previous year. During our phone conversation, he promised Sheila would put my birthday in their family calendar with multiple reminders. Timothy had sent an expensive flower arrangement 3 days late with a card that read, "For the most important woman in my life." Sorry, I'm such a terrible son. Claire had called me twice in the months following that forgotten birthday, conversations that felt forced, but gave me hope that she was trying to rebuild our connection. I told myself that their guilt was proof of their love, that the shame they'd felt would prevent them from making the same mistake again. I spent the year leading up to my 78th birthday, watching for signs that they were thinking of me, that the date was somewhere in their consciousness. When Jonas called in February to tell me about the twins' honor roll achievements, I mentioned casually that spring was my favorite season because of my March birthday. When Claire sent me a Christmas card featuring a photo of her family in matching sweaters, I wrote back mentioning how much I was looking forward to celebrating another year of life with the people I loved most. But as March 22nd approached, I felt the familiar anxiety building in my chest. The phone calls hadn't increased. No one had mentioned dinner plans, or asked about my preferences for celebration. By March 15th, exactly 1 week before my birthday, I faced a painful truth. They were going to forget again. This time, I decided not to make myself vulnerable to the disappointment. I didn't make restaurant reservations or buy a new dress. I didn't get my hair done or tell Margaret at the salon about my upcoming celebration. Instead, I planned a quiet day for myself. A morning walk through my garden, lunch at the small cafe in town where nobody knew me, and an evening reading in my study. But even with lowered expectations, the silence on March 22nd felt like a physical blow. I woke up that morning, hoping against hope that one of my children would surprise me with an early phone call or an unexpected visit. I checked my phone obsessively, telling myself that they might be planning something special that required secrecy. By noon, when no calls had come, I drove to the cafe as planned. The owner, a kind woman named Rosa who'd run the place for 30 years, noticed me sitting alone and asked if I was celebrating anything special. "It's my birthday," I admitted, immediately regretting the words because they sounded so pathetic coming from a woman dining alone. "Well, happy birthday," Rosa exclaimed, bringing me a slice of their homemade chocolate cake with a single candle. "This one's on the house. Everyone deserves to be celebrated on their special day." A stranger's kindness made me cry right there in the middle of the cafe. Rosa's simple gesture of recognition meant more to me than all the expensive gifts my children had sent to assuage their guilt over the previous year's oversight. I returned home that afternoon to find my answering machine blinking with a single message. For a moment, my heart leaped with hope, but it was only my dentist's office confirming an appointment for the following week. The silence stretched through the evening like a physical presence in my house. This time, I didn't call them. I didn't give them the opportunity to manufacture explanations or express hollow remorse. If my birthday mattered to them, they would remember it without prompting. If I mattered to them, they would find a way to show it without me having to ask. 3 days passed before Jonas called, and I could tell from his voice that Sheila had reminded him about the date. "Mom, I don't know what to say," he began, his voice thick with embarrassment. "I put it in my calendar, I swear I did, but somehow I still missed it. The twins had their school science fair, and I was in court all week on the Morrison case, and Jonas," I interrupted gently. "You don't need to explain. I understand that you're busy. But that's no excuse," he insisted. "You're my mother. Your birthday should be the most important date on my calendar. Should be." The phrase hung between us like an indictment. We both knew that should be and was were two very different things. Claire called the next day with a similar litany of excuses: a client crisis, Sarah's dance recital, Joseph's business trip that had thrown off their entire schedule. Timothy didn't call at all, and when I finally reached him a week later, he seemed surprised that I was bringing up something as trivial as a missed birthday. "Mom, we're not children anymore," he said, a hint of irritation in his voice. "Do we really need to make such a big production out of birthdays? I thought you'd appreciate that we treat you like an adult instead of some fragile old lady who needs constant attention." His words stung because they revealed how completely he misunderstood the situation. This wasn't about needing attention or wanting to be treated like a child. This was about being remembered, being valued, being treated like someone who mattered in their lives. But I didn't try to explain this to Timothy because I was beginning to understand that he genuinely didn't see the difference. The third forgotten birthday was different because I felt it coming. There were no promises this time, no guilty apologies from the previous year to build false hope upon. The children had settled back into their busy lives, and I had become a peripheral figure they thought about only when directly prompted. I spent my 79th birthday alone by choice, taking a long drive to the Hudson Valley to visit the antique shops Carl and I used to browse when we were young and poor and dreaming of the life we'd build together. I bought myself a vintage brooch that reminded me of one my mother had worn, and I had lunch at a restaurant overlooking the river where Carl had proposed 45 years earlier. It was peaceful, actually. There was something liberating about not waiting for phone calls that wouldn't come, not hoping for gestures that wouldn't be made. I was learning to find contentment in my own company, to stop measuring my worth by other people's attention. But liberation and heartbreak often look the same from the outside, and as I drove home that evening, I realized that something fundamental had shifted inside me. I had stopped expecting my children to love me the way I loved them, and in that stopping, I had found a dangerous kind of peace. The fourth forgotten birthday would be different because I was different. I was no longer the mother who made excuses for her children's neglect. I was becoming someone else entirely. The morning after my 80th birthday came and went without a single acknowledgement. I woke with a clarity that surprised me. There was no sadness, no anger, just a cool understanding that this was exactly what I had expected. 4 years now, 4 consecutive birthdays erased from their memories like I had never been born at all. I made my coffee and sat in my sunroom watching the March snow dust my garden, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete certainty about what needed to be done. I had stopped waiting for love that would never come in the form I needed it. And in that stopping, I had found something unexpected, the strength to value myself enough to demand the same from others. At 9 o'clock sharp, I called Timothy Willis, my attorney, who had been handling my legal affairs since I'd incorporated Bale Industries 35 years ago. Timothy was 68, sharp as a steel blade, and had seen enough family drama in his career to fill several tragic novels. When I told him I wanted to schedule an urgent meeting to revise my will, he didn't ask questions over the phone. "How's tomorrow morning, Irene?" he said simply. 10 o'clock in my office. Perfect. And Timothy, bring the documents for establishing a charitable foundation. We have significant changes to discuss. I arrived at his Park Avenue office the next morning, wearing my favorite burgundy suit, the one I'd worn to sign our first major international contract. Timothy's assistant, Mrs. Chen, had been with his firm for 20 years, and greeted me with the warm professionalism of someone who'd watched my business grow from a garage operation to a manufacturing empire. "Mrs. Bale," Timothy said, as I settled into the familiar leather chair across from his mahogany desk, "what can I do for you today?" I had rehearsed this conversation during my sleepless night, but sitting there in the morning sunlight streaming through his windows, the words felt heavier than I had expected. "I want to completely restructure my estate plan," I said simply. "I want to remove Claire, Timothy, and Jonas as beneficiaries and establish something more meaningful with my assets." Timothy raised an eyebrow but kept his expression neutral. After 4 decades of practice, he'd learned not to show surprise at family complications. "That's a significant change, Irene. May I ask what's prompted this decision?" I took a deep breath and told him about the 4 forgotten birthdays, about the pattern of neglect that had crystallized into something I could no longer ignore. "Timothy, I spent 40 years building Bale Industries not just as a business, but as a legacy for my children. I sacrificed my social life, my personal interests, even my health to create something that would secure their futures, and they can't be bothered to remember the day I was born." Timothy set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. "Have you considered discussing this with them directly? Sometimes people need to understand how their actions affect others before they can change." I appreciated his gentle approach, but I was past the point of needing to teach basic consideration to adults in their 40s and 50s. "Timothy, I raised 3 children to understand kindness, thoughtfulness, and family loyalty. If they haven't learned those lessons by now, that's not a communication problem, that's a character problem." He nodded slowly, making notes on his yellow legal pad. "Where would you like your assets to go instead?" I had spent months thinking about this carefully. "I want to establish the Irene Bale Foundation for Women Entrepreneurs. I want to provide seed funding and mentorship for women starting their own businesses, particularly widows and single mothers who face the same challenges I did. I want my house to go to a nonprofit that provides transitional housing for families in crisis, and I want a substantial portion to go to the Children's Hospital where I've volunteered for the past decade. Timothy made detailed notes as I spoke. These are all worthy causes, Irene. But I have to ask one more time. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want? Family relationships can be complicated, but they're not always irreparable. I'm certain, I said firmly. For 4 years I've given them opportunities to show they value our relationship. They've failed every single time. I'm not going to spend whatever years I have left waiting for them to develop consciences they should have had decades ago. We spent the next 2 hours going through the specifics. Timothy was thorough and professional, asking detailed questions about the foundation's structure, the selection criteria for grant recipients, and the transition timeline for transferring assets. His decades of experience showed in every suggestion, every contingency he helped me consider. Irene, he said as we wrapped up, I'm going to have these documents drafted and ready for your signature next Friday. But I want you to take this week to really consider the finality of what you're doing. Once you sign these papers, there's no simple way to reverse these decisions. I understand, I said, standing to shake his hand, and I'll be here next Friday to sign them. I left his office feeling lighter than I had in months. For the first time in years, I was taking control of my own story instead of waiting for other people to write the ending for me. The week following my meeting with Timothy passed with a strange serenity I hadn't experienced in years. I had made the decision, and now I was living in the space between the old Irene, the woman who organized her life around her children's needs, and the new Irene, the woman who was finally putting herself first. It was remarkable how much mental energy was freed up when I stopped checking my phone for messages that never came, and stopped crafting thoughtful text messages that went unacknowledged. For the first time in memory, I didn't call any of my children that week. I didn't send Claire articles about cases that might interest her, didn't forward Timothy market analysis reports I thought he'd find valuable, and didn't text Jonas photos of his daughter's artwork that I'd kept framed in my study. I simply lived my life without making them the center of it. The change was immediate and intoxicating. Wednesday morning, instead of spending an hour researching investment strategies to discuss with Timothy during our monthly call, I drove to the Westchester Botanical Gardens and spent 3 hours walking through the Orchid Conservatory. I'd always loved orchids but had never allowed myself the luxury of simply appreciating their beauty without feeling guilty about more productive uses of my time. Thursday afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I went to a matinee movie by myself. The film was a romantic comedy that Claire would have dismissed as mindless fluff, but I laughed until my sides hurt and left the theater feeling lighter than I had in years. When was the last time I had done something purely for my own enjoyment without considering whether it would be interesting to share with my children? Friday morning, I visited the Children's Hospital, where I'd been volunteering in the cancer ward for the past 10 years. But this time, instead of my usual 2-hour shift reading to patients, I stayed for 6 hours. I played board games with 8-year-old Marcus, whose parents worked double shifts and couldn't visit during the day. I helped 12-year-old Sophia write a letter to her teacher explaining why she'd be missing school for another month of treatment. I sat with 16-year-old David while he received chemotherapy, listening to him talk about his dreams of becoming a mechanical engineer. These children, facing battles that made my family problems seem trivial, showed more gratitude for my presence in 2 hours than my own children had shown in 2 years. Marcus hugged me when I helped him finish a 1,000-piece puzzle. Sophia asked if I'd be her hospital grandma, since her real grandmother lived too far away to visit. David thanked me for treating him like a normal teenager instead of a sick kid who needed to be handled with careful words and pitying looks. Mrs. Bale, said Dr. Patricia Chen, the head of pediatric oncology, as I was preparing to leave that evening. I don't know what's different about you today, but you seemed more present than usual. The children responded to something special in your energy. Her observation startled me, because I hadn't realized the change was visible to others. I think I'm finally learning to be fully where I am, instead of wishing I were somewhere else, I told her. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since Carl died. I cooked an elaborate dinner just for myself. Not the simple meals I'd been surviving on, but the kind of multi-course feast I used to prepare when I was trying to impress business clients or celebrate family milestones. I made Carl's favorite beef Wellington, roasted vegetables from my garden, and homemade chocolate soufflé, the dessert I'd perfected during our early marriage when we were too poor to eat at fancy restaurants, but too in love to care. I set the dining room table with my best china, lit candles, and opened a bottle of wine from the collection Carl and I had started during our 20th wedding anniversary trip to Napa Valley. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, and for the first time in years, I enjoyed my own company. I wasn't lonely. I was alone by choice, and there was a profound difference between those two states of being. As I cleaned up after dinner, I caught sight of myself in the reflection of the dining room window. I looked different somehow. My posture was straighter, my expression more peaceful. I looked like a woman who had made an important decision, and was comfortable with the consequences. That night, I called Timothy's office, and left a message confirming our Friday appointment. Timothy, this is Irene Bale. I'll be there at 10 o'clock, to sign the new will. I've never been more certain of a decision in my life. I went to bed that night as a woman who had finally stopped apologizing for expecting basic human decency from the people who claimed to love her. Tomorrow, I would wake up as someone else entirely. Irene Bale, the woman who knew her worth, and wasn't afraid to demand that others recognize it too. Friday morning arrived, crisp and clear, and I returned to Timothy's office with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since the early days of building Bale Industries. I signed the documents without hesitation, my signature steady, and my mind clearer than it had been in years. As Timothy notarized each page and filed them away in his secure cabinet, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Complete peace with a major life decision. It's done, Timothy said quietly. Are you at peace with this choice, Irene? More at peace than I've been in years, I told him honestly. The following week settled into a rhythm that surprised me with its contentment. I established new routines that didn't revolve around accommodating my children's schedules or creating opportunities for connection that they didn't want. Instead, I focused on activities that brought me genuine fulfillment. I started taking watercolor classes at the local community center, something I'd always wanted to try, but never had time for when I was building the business and raising children. The instructor, a patient woman named Claire Harold, who couldn't have been more than 40, treated our group of mostly older students like we were capable of creating masterpieces. In the gentle focus required to mix colors and control the flow of paint on paper, I found a meditation I didn't know I needed. It was during my third painting class that I met Tiffany Wayne, a retired librarian who had moved to Westchester after her husband's death to be closer to her sister. Tiffany was witty and irreverent, with silver hair she wore in a stylish bob, and a laugh that could brighten any room. When she discovered I lived alone in the big house on Maple Ridge, she appointed herself my social coordinator. Irene, you're too interesting to be a hermit, she announced one Thursday after class. I'm taking you to lunch at that new bistro downtown. Lunch turned into a weekly tradition. Tiffany had a gift for asking questions that made me think, and she listened to my answers without trying to fix me or offer unwanted advice. When I told her about changing my will, she nodded thoughtfully. My son lives in Seattle, she said, stirring her soup. He calls every other Sunday like clockwork, has for 5 years, but you know what? Those calls feel like duty, not love. He's checking a box, making sure he can't be accused of neglecting his mother. Sometimes I think I'd rather have no calls at all, than calls that feel like charity work. Her honesty was refreshing. So many people my age spent their time making excuses for their children's neglect, as if admitting disappointment was a betrayal of motherhood itself. Do you regret having children? I asked her one afternoon, as we sat in Ridgeway Park, feeding ducks with breadcrumbs from our lunch. Tiffany considered this seriously. No, she said finally. I loved raising my son. Those early years were some of the happiest of my life. But I regret thinking that giving someone life means they owe you theirs. I regret not teaching him that love is a choice you make every day, not a debt you pay off once and consider settled. These conversations with Tiffany became a lifeline I didn't know I needed. She helped me see that my decision wasn't vindictive or petty. It was self-preservation. It was also Tiffany who introduced me to Joseph Willis, a widowed professor emeritus from Columbia, who had recently moved to a house 3 streets from mine. Joseph had taught mechanical engineering for 30 years and spent his retirement restoring vintage automobiles, a hobby that immediately connected us through Bale Industries' automotive heritage. Irene, Tiffany said one evening when the 3 of us met for dinner at the Italian restaurant downtown, you should see Joseph's workshop. He's got a 1967 Mustang that he's rebuilt from the ground up, using parts that your company probably manufactured. Joseph was quietly charming, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and hands that still bore the calluses of someone who worked with tools. When he learned about my background in automotive manufacturing, his face lit up with genuine interest. I've been using Bale Industries parts for 15 years, he said. Your company's precision machining is legendary among restoration enthusiasts. I had no idea I was dining with automotive royalty. His respect for my professional accomplishments, combined with his complete ignorance of my family drama, was like cool water on a burn I didn't realize still hurt. Joseph saw me as Irene, the successful businesswoman, not Irene, the neglected mother, and there was something healing about being appreciated for what I'd built, rather than pitied for what I'd lost. When Joseph asked if I'd like to see his workshop the following weekend, I didn't hesitate. I'd love to, I said. It's been years since I've seen automotive craftsmanship up close. As I drove home that evening, I realized I was looking forward to something that had nothing to do with my children or their opinions of me. I was building relationships based on mutual interests and genuine affection, not on obligation or guilt. For the first time in years, I was excited about what tomorrow might bring. October arrived with its usual spectacle of changing leaves, and I was deadheading the last of my chrysanthemums when I heard a car door slam in my driveway. I looked up to see a woman in an expensive navy suit walking toward me, her heels clicking against the flagstone path with the determined stride of someone on a mission. "Mrs. Bale?" she asked, stopping a few feet away with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Amanda Harold from Harold Communications Group. I was hoping we could speak privately." I pulled off my gardening gloves and studied her face. She had the polished appearance of someone who worked in crisis management or public relations, all perfect teeth and calculated warmth. "What can I do for you, Miss Harold?" "I represent your son Timothy Bale," she said, consulting her phone. "He's retained our firm to help resolve what he believes may be a misunderstanding between you and your family." The audacity of it knocked the breath from my lungs. Timothy had hired professional intermediaries to approach his own mother rather than picking up the phone himself. "There's no misunderstanding," I said calmly. "Timothy knows exactly how to reach me if he wants to have a conversation." Amanda's smile became more strained. "Mrs. Bale, Your children are very concerned about some recent legal decisions you've made. They're worried that you may have been influenced by people who don't have your best interests at heart. Which people would those be? I asked, though I already suspected where this was heading. Well, there are concerns about new friendships you've formed, activities you've been participating in. Sometimes when people are feeling isolated, they can become susceptible to manipulation by individuals seeking to benefit from their loneliness. She was talking about Tiffany and Joseph, two people who had shown me more genuine care in 6 months than my children had in 6 years. The implication that my newfound happiness was evidence of manipulation rather than healing made my jaw clench. Miss Harold, I said, setting down my gardening basket, I'm going to make this very simple for you. If Timothy wants to discuss my legal decisions, he can call me himself. I don't conduct family business through hired representatives. But Mrs. Bale, he's tried calling. He left several messages that you haven't returned. This was news to me. I checked my answering machine religiously and maintained my voicemail carefully. When did he supposedly call? Amanda consulted her phone again. Yesterday evening around 7, and again this morning around 9. He's very worried about your well-being. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized someone had been making inquiries about me, possibly accessing information they shouldn't have. Miss Harold, I haven't received any calls from Timothy in over 2 months. Either you're mistaken about these calls or someone is lying to you about their attempts to reach me. Her composure slipped slightly. I can only relay the information I've been given. The important thing is that your family loves you and wants to help resolve whatever issues have led to this estrangement. What estrangement? I asked sharply. My children have been estranged from me for years. The only thing that's changed is that I've stopped pretending otherwise. Amanda looked genuinely uncomfortable now, shifting her weight in her impractical shoes. Mrs. Bale, perhaps we could sit down somewhere private and discuss this more thoroughly. I think there may be some miscommunication that we could clear up. The only miscommunication, I said, is my children's belief that they can hire strangers to manage their relationships while avoiding any personal accountability. Please leave my property. After Amanda drove away, I went inside and immediately called Timothy Willis. Timothy, I need to see you today if possible. I believe someone is investigating my personal life and possibly accessing information about my legal affairs. Irene, I was just about to call you, Timothy said, his voice tense. We have a serious problem. Someone contacted my office this morning, claiming to be conducting a routine background check for insurance purposes. My secretary followed protocol and refused to release any information, but then we started getting calls from a law firm in Manhattan asking questions about your mental competency and the circumstances surrounding your recent will changes. The room seemed to spin around me. Mental competency? They're not filing any formal challenges yet, but Irene, they're laying groundwork. These are the preliminary steps someone takes when they're considering contesting a will on the grounds that the testator wasn't of sound mind when the document was executed. I sank into my kitchen chair, my hands trembling. Can they really do that? Can they claim I'm mentally incompetent because I chose not to leave them my money? They can try, Timothy said grimly. And unfortunately, these challenges sometimes succeed, especially if they can manufacture evidence of depression, isolation, or susceptibility to outside influence. Irene, we need to document your mental acuity immediately. I'm going to recommend that you see a neuropsychologist for a comprehensive cognitive assessment. After hanging up with Timothy, I sat in my kitchen as autumn darkness fell around me, trying to process what was happening. My own children were preparing to publicly question my sanity because I had dared to value myself enough to expect basic consideration from them. The cruelty of it was staggering. They couldn't remember my birthday, but they could remember to hire lawyers when they discovered that neglect had consequences. 3 days after Amanda Harold's visit, my phone rang at exactly 8 o'clock in the evening. The caller ID showed Timothy's number, my son, not my attorney, and I felt my stomach tighten as I answered. "Mom," he said, his voice carefully controlled in the way I remembered from his childhood when he was trying to manage a situation he didn't fully understand. "We need to talk." "Hello, Timothy, it's been quite a while since you've called." "I know, and I apologize for that. But Mom, I'm calling because I'm genuinely concerned about some decisions you've been making lately. This will change, for instance. It's so unlike you." I felt that familiar cold anger settling in my chest. "How is it unlike me, Timothy?" "Well, you've always been family-oriented. You've always put us first, made sure we were taken care of." "This seems so," he paused, searching for the right word. "Vindictive." Vindictive, because protecting myself from decades of neglect was vindictive. "Timothy, when was the last time you called me before tonight?" Silence stretched across the phone line. "When was the last time you visited?" More silence. "When was my birthday this year?" I could almost hear him thinking, calculating, realizing he was walking into a trap of his own making. "Mom, I know I haven't been the best about staying in touch." "March 22nd, I interrupted. "My birthday was March 22nd. I turned 80. You didn't call, didn't send a card, didn't acknowledge that the woman who sacrificed everything to build your future had reached a milestone birthday." "I meant to call," he said weakly. "Time just got away from me with the Henderson merger, and time got away from you for 4 consecutive years, Timothy. But somehow you found time to hire investigators and lawyers when you discovered I'd changed my will." I heard him take a deep breath. "Mom, look. I admit I should have handled this better. I should have called you directly instead of going through Amanda. But when I heard about the will change, I panicked. I thought maybe someone was taking advantage of you, manipulating you into making decisions you wouldn't normally make." "Who exactly do you think is manipulating me?" "I don't know. Maybe this new friend you've been spending time with. Or that man Joseph. Sometimes when people are lonely, they become vulnerable to individuals who might have ulterior motives." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. My son genuinely believed that anyone who treated me with kindness must have an agenda, because the idea that I deserved genuine affection was apparently inconceivable to him. "Timothy," I said quietly, "let me ask you something. In the past year, how many times has Tiffany Wayne asked me for money?" "I don't know." 0. "How many times has Joseph Willis mentioned my business or my assets?" "I wouldn't know that either." 0. "Now let me ask you this. How many times in the past month have you or your siblings contacted me about anything other than my will?" The silence that followed was answer enough. "Timothy, the only people who seem interested in my money are the 3 people who forgot I existed until they discovered they weren't getting it." "That's not fair, Mom." "What's not fair?" I said, my voice rising slightly, "is spending 40 years building a fortune to secure your futures, only to be treated like an inconvenience by the people who benefited most from my sacrifices." The cognitive assessment with Dr. Patricia Henning was scheduled for the following Tuesday at her office in White Plains. I arrived early, dressed in my best business suit, feeling like I was preparing for the most important presentation of my life, which in many ways I was. Dr. Henning was a woman in her 50s with kind but penetrating eyes, and the sort of professional demeanor that immediately put me at ease. "Mrs. Bale," she said, as we settled into her office, "I understand you're here for a comprehensive cognitive evaluation. Can you tell me what prompted this assessment?" I explained the situation honestly, the forgotten birthdays, the will change, and my children's legal challenge to my mental competency. Dr. Henning listened without judgment, occasionally taking notes, never once suggesting that my reactions were unreasonable or disproportionate. The assessment itself was exhausting, but oddly satisfying. For 4 hours, I completed memory tests, reasoning puzzles, and problem-solving exercises that required me to demonstrate the cognitive skills I'd used to build a multi-million-dollar business empire. I answered detailed questions about my life, my relationships, and my motivations for changing my will. "Mrs. Bale," Dr. Henning said at the end of the session, "I want you to know that you've performed exceptionally well on all measures. Your cognitive function is significantly above average for your age group. Your reasoning is clear, your memory is sharp, and your emotional responses are entirely appropriate to the circumstances you've described. So I'm not crazy for protecting myself from people who don't value me." Dr. Henning smiled. "You're not crazy at all. You're a woman who has recognized unhealthy relationship patterns and made rational decisions to protect your emotional well-being. That's not mental illness. That's wisdom." Her formal report, completed a week later, was 23 pages of detailed analysis, proving that Irene Bale was not only mentally competent but demonstrating exceptional emotional intelligence in managing difficult family relationships. Meanwhile, Timothy Willis had been busy building our defense. He documented every attempt my children had made to contact me since the will change, which amounted to Amanda Harold's visit, and Timothy's single phone call. He'd gathered character references from Dr. Chen at the Children's Hospital, from my watercolor instructor Claire Harold, and from the staff at the community center where I volunteered. Most powerfully, he'd obtained testimonies from Tiffany and Joseph, the two people my children claimed were manipulating me. Tiffany's statement was particularly devastating to their case. She detailed our friendship, emphasizing that money had never been discussed between us, and that if anything, she'd encouraged me to value myself more, not to make rash financial decisions. Joseph's testimony was equally compelling. When asked about my mental state during our friendship, he described a woman who was intellectually curious, emotionally stable, and remarkably well-informed about complex business matters. The idea that Irene Bale could be manipulated into doing anything she didn't want to do, he wrote, is absurd to anyone who actually knows her. By December, it became clear that my children's legal challenge was collapsing under the weight of evidence contradicting their claims. Every expert who examined me confirmed my mental fitness. Every friend who testified described a woman making rational choices about her own life. Timothy Willis called me on a snowy Thursday morning with the news I'd been hoping to hear. "Irene, they're withdrawing the challenge. Their attorneys have advised them that they have no chance of success, and that continuing would only result in expensive legal fees with no possibility of recovery. It's over. It's over. Your will stands as written, and frankly, their failed challenge has created a legal record that will make any future attempts extremely difficult." I sat in my kitchen, watching the snow fall on my garden, and felt a profound sense of vindication wash over me. The defeat of my children's legal challenge marked the beginning of what I can only describe as the most peaceful period of my adult life. February brought my 81st birthday, and for the first time in 5 years, I looked forward to it with genuine excitement rather than dread. I planned my own celebration, a small gathering in my sunroom with Tiffany, Joseph, Claire Harold from my painting class, and Dr. Chen from the Children's Hospital. We ate cake from the local bakery that had become my favorite, told stories that made us laugh until our sides hurt, and watched the late winter light filter through the windows onto my latest watercolor attempts. Joseph surprised me with a vintage automotive manual from 1952, the year Bale Industries was founded. "I thought you might enjoy seeing how far manufacturing has come since you started," he said, his eyes twinkling behind his glasses. The gift was thoughtful in a way that showed he'd been listening to my stories, remembering details that mattered to me. Tiffany gave me a leather-bound journal with a note that read, "For recording the adventures still to come, Dr. Chen brought me a handmade card from the children in the cancer ward, decorated with crayon drawings of flowers, and signed with messages like Happy Birthday to our favorite volunteer grandma." As the evening wound down and my guests helped clean up, I felt a contentment I'd never experienced before. This was what a birthday celebration looked like when it was attended by people who genuinely wanted to be there, who valued my presence in their lives rather than simply fulfilling obligations. The following week, I received an unexpected phone call that would test whether my newfound peace was genuine or simply the calm before another storm. The caller ID showed Jonas's number, and I debated whether to answer. We hadn't spoken since Timothy's confrontational call 4 months earlier. "Mom," he said, when I finally picked up, his voice different somehow, smaller, less confident than I remembered. "I know I probably don't have the right to ask this, but could we meet somewhere and talk, just the two of us?" There was something in his tone that gave me pause, a vulnerability I hadn't heard since he was a child. "What did you want to talk about, Jonas?" "About how I've been as a son, about what I can do to fix the damage I've caused. About whether there's any possibility that we could have a real relationship, even if I don't deserve one." His honesty surprised me. Unlike Timothy's defensive justifications, or Claire's continued silence, Jonas sounded like someone who had genuinely examined his own behavior and found it lacking. "Where did you want to meet?" I asked after a long pause. "Anywhere you choose, Mom. I'll drive wherever you want, whenever works for you." I thought about neutral territory, somewhere public but private enough for difficult conversations. "Do you remember Riverside Park in Tarrytown, where we used to go for picnics when you were little?" "I remember. Saturday afternoon. 2 o'clock, I said. "I'll be at the bench by the playground." After hanging up, I sat in my study wondering what Jonas wanted to say, and whether I was ready to hear it. But for the first time in years, I was approaching a conversation with one of my children from a position of strength rather than hope, and that made all the difference. Saturday arrived gray and drizzly, with the kind of late February weather that couldn't decide between winter and spring. I arrived at Riverside Park a few minutes early, and chose the bench by the playground, where Jonas and I used to feed ducks when he was small enough to need my help breaking the bread into pieces they could swallow. Jonas's car pulled into the parking lot exactly at 2 o'clock, and I watched him walk toward me with the same nervous energy I remembered from his childhood, when he had something difficult to confess. He looked older than I remembered, with new lines around his eyes and gray threads in his dark hair that he hadn't bothered to hide. He was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, no expensive suit, no power tie, like he had decided to show up as himself rather than the successful attorney he'd become. "Hi, Mom," he said, settling onto the bench beside me. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. You sounded like you had something important to say." Jonas was quiet for a moment, watching a father push his young daughter on the swings nearby. The sight seemed to affect him deeply, and when he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I've been in therapy since December," he said. "Since the legal challenge collapsed and I realized what we'd put you through. Sheila insisted on it, after she found out what Timothy and Claire and I had done. She was horrified, Mom. She couldn't believe that we'd tried to have you declared incompetent rather than simply accepting that our own behavior had consequences." I didn't respond, just waited for him to continue. "My therapist asked me to do an exercise," Jonas went on. "She wanted me to imagine how I'd feel if my daughters forgot my birthday for 4 years running, then hired lawyers to question my sanity when I finally stood up for myself. And Mom, when I really thought about it, when I put myself in your position, I felt sick." He turned to face me fully, and I could see tears in his eyes. I'm not here to ask you to change your will back. I'm not here to negotiate or manipulate or make excuses. I'm here to apologize for being the kind of son who forgot that the most important woman in his life deserved basic human decency. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, so different from Timothy's defensive justifications or Claire's continued silence. What changed your mind, Jonas? Emma asked me about you last week, he said, his voice breaking slightly. She wanted to know why we never visit Grandma Irene anymore, why she doesn't come to family dinners like Sheila's mother does. And I realized I didn't have an answer that wouldn't make me sound like a terrible person. We sat in silence for a while, watching the February light filter through the bare trees. Finally Jonas spoke again. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I can't undo 4 years of neglect with one conversation. But Mom, if you'd be willing to let me try, I'd like to learn how to be a better son. Not because of inheritance or money or family obligation, but because I love you and I've been doing a terrible job of showing it. I studied my youngest son's face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculation, but all I saw was someone who looked genuinely remorseful, genuinely committed to change. Jonas, I said carefully, I need you to understand something. Even if we manage to rebuild our relationship, I'm not changing my will. The Irene Bale Foundation, the donations to charity, all of that stays exactly as it is. I know, he said, immediately. And honestly, Mom, I'm glad you're doing something meaningful with your money. The foundation you're creating will help women who face the same challenges you did. That's a legacy to be proud of. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of hope about one of my children.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.